It's back, baby! Jeep just announced the return of a new Cherokee, and we've got pics.
Yeah, we're also very excited about this because not only do we love Jeeps, but the Cherokee in particular has always represented a great offering somewhere in between a practical everyday driver, but also something that you still could take on a trail.
Now, the Jeep Cherokee has a long and storied history. Even before the really boxy Cherokees of the 80s and the 90s that people know, the nameplate dates back well before then.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about the history, because I think most people obviously are very familiar with the XJs like you're talking about that they made for such a long time and that you still see all over the place. But like you said, the name tag goes back quite a bit.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, so even before the 1980s, you had the full-size Cherokees and the SJ models, which were very cool, and they had all sorts of cool graphics. But really, the Cherokee that solidified the nameplate was the launch of, I believe it was 1984, with the XJ Cherokee, which was a revolution in small SUVs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do agree. Some of the SJs are really cool, especially like a Cherokee Chief, two-door. Those are pretty rad. But the XJs are iconic. Solid axles, 4-liter straight six. That's not what they're bringing back now.
Well, we don't know that for sure, Keith.
That it's not going to have a 4-liter and solid axles?
They might, but let's kind of show off some of the history of the Cherokee. So, Jen, if you want to go to that old school one. So the XJ Cherokee, they sold millions of these things, right? And Case already mentioned the solid axle and the inline six, but these were the right car at the right time. And they were the right size at the right price. They were excellent at moving families around. They were great at getting to your winter cabins. They were awesome.
Yeah, still a very desirable vehicle to this day. One that has gone up a little bit in value over the last couple of years. You bought one that was in really good shape many years ago for around $3,500 and ended up selling it for what, close to 10?
Close to 10 grand, yeah. So they're really appreciating in value. But after this Cherokee, there's a long pause in Cherokee development. I think these were discontinued in 01. And then over a decade later, they launched the next generation Cherokee, which was discontinued in 2023. And this was a very different car.
Yeah, also slightly controversially styled. Definitely not the square-jawed looks that we remember from the XJ, but the cool thing about these is that you could still spec them out to be pretty capable little machines so long as your expectations were set for the type of vehicle that it is.
Now, the code name for this Jeep was KL, and KL Cherokees are very underrated in my opinion. They have some pretty big issues, like the 9-speed automatics weren't very good. But if you get a Trailhawk like this one, they had a crazy dual range 4-wheel drive system where they actually had 2 sets of low ranges. Because it was a crossover based 4-wheel drive system without a center diff, what they did was a front transfer unit and a rear transfer unit, essentially. So you had a low range in the front and a low range for the rear axle. But what it meant was it was the only car in its class that had a low range set of gears. So it was really good off-road.
Yeah, again, kind of a strange solution to the 4-wheel drive problem, but it still made these reasonably capable, especially with a fairly meaty tire. And like you can see from the factory there, some tow hooks, a little bit of underbody protection, not a ton of articulation.
Factory locker, rear locker.
So it had a couple things going for it. But now we can actually settle on and talk about the new Cherokee, the one that this news video is actually about, because they've made quite a few changes to it, most of which we don't know yet. But we do know what it looks like. We know a little bit about the powertrain, and there's a few things that we can infer.
So, Jen, let's show them the new one, and here it comes. Boom! Our first look at the new Cherokee. Now, this car is coming out toward the end of 2025.
Yep.
So likely we are not going to start seeing these in showrooms into 2026, right? But this design has harkened a lot further back to the first generation XJ than the KL, right? So walk us through like the front end design here.
Yeah, what I love here is that they've made it quite a bit more boxy, more square jawed, and I think that's right in line with what they should be doing to this vehicle. So looking at the front end, we've got a very squared off headlight design, even a little line coming down from the headlight into the cladding at the bottom of the bumper, cladding going back over the wheels and the wheel wells. You can see some cladding underneath the door. So they've done quite a bit to make it look more rugged, but still a pretty high belt line. It looks like kind of a slightly squished greenhouse. So it's an interesting design. It's kind of a mix. It's definitely a very modern looking design.
Yeah.
But I like that they've mixed in some sharper squared off lines. The one thing that I'm not seeing on the front end of this particular model that's pictured, which I would like to see on at least some, if not all models, would be recovery points up front.
Yeah, so we've got kind of these chunky looking venti things in the front that look like they could be recovery points, but it's pretty clear that it doesn't have them integrated into the front end. It also looks pretty low to the ground, which is kind of interesting. And I'm sure, just like the previous generation, there's going to be a ton of different trims. And like if you got a Latitude Cherokee compared to a Trailhawk, they're going to have very different front ends. And we're probably going to see this on this new Cherokee, believed to be called the KM, right?
Yeah, and judging by the wheel tire package that's on this one in particular, I wouldn't be surprised if this is definitely not the most rugged model that will come out at launch, or maybe even a little past launch when they might release a few extra trims. I feel like it would make sense for them to aim this squarely at a vehicle like the Passport Trail Sport.
You're exactly right. That's 100%. Now, here's another version of Cherokee, and we get to see more of the side profile. The front end is kind of distinct in its look. The side profile looks very Grand Cherokee to me. So the way that kind of belt line wraps up toward the D-pillar, the way that A-pillar kind of brings into that slightly swoopy roof line, and then, like you mentioned, that kind of squish greenhouse with the high belt line seems very Grand Cherokee in its integration.
It does. From the front end, you can tell the obvious difference, but I see what you mean, especially the way that the A-pillar sweeps back to the rear end.
The continuous black roof look.
Yeah, the entire greenhouse looks, and the side profile looks very Grand Cherokee. I don't think that that's a bad thing. But I like that they've made it more square than the previous generation Cherokee was. I think that was a good move.
Jen, can you try to zoom in on the front end of this one? Just like take your little cursor there and yeah, okay, here we go. I can't tell if this one's got the recovery points on the front end. It's got those kind of Renegade style wheels that I know you love, Case.
Oh yeah, it definitely, it doesn't look like this one has recovery points up front either. One interesting thing that we do know about the powertrain on this machine is that it is going to be a hybrid.
Yeah, so let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so the question is, what exactly hybrid system are they going to use? And I don't know, I'd be a little surprised, I think. Well, maybe not. It could be the 2-liter 4xe system that we've seen in some of their other vehicles, but I don't know, it seems like kind of a step up from the powertrains that they probably have in a vehicle a little more compact like this one.
It's going to be really interesting to see because that 4xe in the Wrangler is built for a longitudinal rear drive setup, right? Similar to the Grand Cherokee, right? Also longitudinal rear drive based. Typically, at least in the previous generation Cherokee, it was a transverse front wheel drive based.
Yeah.
So it'd probably be a little different.
Yeah, which is a much better way of phrasing what I was trying to say. The 2-liter powertrain, seems set up for a slightly bigger platform. So, yeah, maybe not the 2-liter 4xe setup. I also didn't see a charge port on the exterior in the same position that we've seen on the Wrangler 4xes.
Good point. Yeah, so we don't know if it's going to be a plug-in hybrid or a standard hybrid. Now, the interesting thing is Jeep is maybe a little behind on some of their hybridization. They're ahead in like the Grand Cherokee and the Wrangler, which is cool, but they don't have a small crossover in this category that is just red hot. I mean, this is the same category as vehicles like the RAV4, like the CRV, right? This is the most popular segment in America, so it's crazy they haven't had one for a couple of years. But overseas, they do have a bunch of smaller crossovers, including vehicles like your favorite car ever made, the Jeep Renegade. And they have both hybrid and plug-in hybrid versions of the Renegade overseas. And what the plug-in hybrid Renegades do, the 4xes, is they have the Toyota all-wheel drive system.
Interesting.
Not exactly the same, but the same concept in that they're front-wheel drive gas crossovers with an e-motor on the back axle and no drive shaft. So I'll be curious to see if that platform carries over to the new Cherokee platform, which I believe is probably going to be STLA, which is what they're basing everything off of. I don't think that was in the press release. It's going to be Stella, but it's a good bet that it's going to be a version of STLA.
To your point, though, it's definitely a category that they need to be in and need to be competitive in if they want to be successful. Obviously, Stellantis has been going through some ebbs and flows, especially as of late. So for them to come out with a successful crossover could be a really big deal for the manufacturer. And this could have the potential to be a pretty red-hot big seller.
Now, the interesting thing I'm seeing about the marketing on this vehicle is when they launched the previous generation of Cherokee, they really were very forward-thinking, right? It had that crazy stacked headlight design with the separated, and they were going for an all-new kind of perception of the Cherokee. With this car, if we go back, Jen, to the previous slide with the advertising, with the other Cherokee grills, that one. They're really, really leaning into the XJ heritage. And I saw kind of the marketing teaser video of this, and they're just really trying to pound that, like, this is a successor to the XJ, which I think is going to make some people mad because on the initial look, it's not quite the same formula.
No, it's definitely, again, we joked about it earlier. It's not going to be solid axles, that's for sure.
Not with that attitude.
It's obviously not going to be a 4-liter straight six. So I get what you mean, but if they are leaning into the XJ portion of this vehicle's heritage and the heritage of the nameplate, then potentially they'll have to at least make it a little bit more capable. If they're going to lean into that, they got to lean into the capability.
If this new Cherokee comes out with solid axles and a 4-liter inline six, will you buy one?
Sure. Yeah.
You're saying that
'Cause it's,
you're saying that publicly in front of thousands of people.
I will say it to anyone who will listen because it's not going to happen. When that doesn't happen, what is my side of the bet? What do you get me?
I will admit to you that Chick-fil-A French fries aren't as bad as I say they are.
Okay. Wow. That's a pretty big deal.
So if this car comes out with a 2-liter 4-cylinder turbo and independent suspension, I will go publicly and admit Chick-fil-A French fries aren't that bad.
Really big deal for Tommy. So yeah, it's definitely going to be a hybrid. That much we do know. It's definitely not going to have solid axles, but I'm still hopeful that they are going to make it reasonably capable, even though we've definitely seen plenty of product from Jeep recently that hasn't leaned into that at all, like the Wagoneer S. That might make some people a little wary of any new product coming out and whether it's going to have any semblance of off-road capability at all.
Yeah.
But Jeep is, with some of their smaller vehicles going all the way back to the Liberty, and as much as I hate to admit it, even the Renegade, they've still infused some amount of off-road capability into them, at least more than the average. I think it'll be the same with this, especially with the way they're marketing it.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing about the old Cherokee and the Renegade is, like, in the small crossover segment, they were the only off-road people in town. Like, you had the Ford Escape, which could do nothing, the RAV4, which could do nothing, the CRV, which could do nothing off-road, right? And then you had the Renegade Trailhawk and the Cherokee Trailhawk. But now, this segment, and there's some crossover, you mentioned, like, the Passport Trail Sport.
Yeah.
Genuinely has some good capability.
Yeah, absolutely. The IVT M4 all-wheel drive system on that Passport Trail Sport, really good. You also get some decent tires, some decent underbody protection from the factory.
Yeah.
On the slightly smaller side, the Bronco Sport.
Pretty killer.
Yeah, especially with the new Sasquatch version of it, a little bit of a lift.
Pretty crazy.
Some more underbody protection on that.
You got, like, Wilderness Subarus coming out with skid plates now, right? And more claimed capability. So, like, and then even with Toyota, you've got, and I know it's probably more appearance, but you have, like, the new Woodland RAV4, which they just launched, right? Get a little bit more clearance. You got the new CRV Trail Sport, which I'm about to go drive as well. So, like, there's so many of these off-road trims. So Jeep's going to have to push it further than they usually would to stay ahead of the game in the capability standpoint.
Yeah, because it's definitely something that's getting ever more popular. Off-roady, rugged versions of crossovers, because a lot of people get a crossover. It's a very practical category of vehicle to be shopping in, so it makes sense. But if somebody's going to spring a little bit of extra money to get a crossover that they're maybe a little bit more excited about and more enthusiastic about, that's where some of these more rugged ones come in. And if Jeep can capitalize on some of that and give it some genuinely capable running gear underneath, then they might have a winner.
Well, folks, we're going to have more information. Debuting this car is supposed to be later 2025. You'll know we'll be covering it, and we'll hopefully be able to do a first drive here shortly as well. But from everyone at TFL, this has been Tommy.
In case.
Head over to alltfl.com. We got more news on the Cherokee coming soon.